Hi, everyone, and welcome to our International Women's Day event, where the theme is progress, not perfection. I'm Marcia, and I'll be facilitating the speakers here. Joining me organizing this event is Emily and Justine, and Miriam and Reedy. Sorry, I hope I said your name right. So thank you for joining us, and this is this. We wanted to start today with a quote from Mel Robbins. Stop trying to be perfect and just start trying. As we were talking about it before we started, perfect is the enemy of done. So this is our agenda. First, we'll hear a talk from Sabri Hamid, who works at Google. It's called Understanding Power, Allyship, and Privilege for Customer Engagements. And then we'll have a Flutter talk from Danielle Cox, and then we'll end with an I Am Remarkable workshop. However, for this workshop, we do need separate registration. I'm not sure how clear that was in the invite, but this link, which was posted
dropped it in the chat.
late. We just dropped it in the chat, so please sign in if you can, and we can have more people join that at the end. So this is, we're your hosts, and we're right here. And then I'm gonna let Sabri take it away.
Thanks. All right, great. So let's go ahead and get started. So hey everyone, my name is Sabri Hamid. I go by he, him. I'm based in the DC area, and what I do with my day job is I'm the lead in Google Cloud for cloud learning services. So we have like some accounts that want to learn Google, and we essentially teach them how to do that. What we're going to talk about today is a concept that's really kind of important to us when we engage with our customers, but also as we engage kind of internally with our stakeholders, which is allyship, power, and privilege. So we have a couple of objectives for the day. Again, it's not, these aren't hard and fast, but really what we want to do is just lay them out. So we want to understand firstly when we say allyship, othering, belonging, privilege, what those terms actually mean and how we are defining them. We want to discuss how we can use allyship in the workplace and how it shows up, and then explore different actions you can take across the dimensions of allyship, and then really just identify resources and opportunities to help you champion allyship, both kind of among your stakeholders and among your teams and or your customers. So I think let's just, get into a quick agreement here on a couple of things. So almost like, virtual safe space, right? So the first thing we want to do is we want to be vulnerable and open-minded. So give yourself permission to kind of be open. The other thing we want to do also is really just understand the difference between being uncomfortable and unsafe, right? So discomfort because of a topic or perspective signals that we're having a reaction to something, doesn't necessarily make it unsafe, right? The immediate next step is to kind of regulate and manage your emotions, understand why. But I think if it's something doesn't quite feel right, maybe just ask yourself, why is that, right? And is it because it's getting too close to something, or if it's genuinely unsafe? Obviously, that's a whole different topic. We want people to be present, so get the most out of the session, be engaged. So take the message, leave the story if you can. So what that means is we're going to be delivering kind of some raw, potential perspectives on things, especially as I get into some of my story, and then as we get into some of the, if we go through a Q&A. So, privacy is also really key. Make space for others as well. So if there's, if you feel really passionate about something and you want to speak out, that's excellent. It's great. We highly encourage it, but make sure that there's space there for others to participate as well. And also the other thing that, I want to just note is people tend to be on their own journey when it comes to kind of, especially around power, privilege, and allyship, around this kind of their migration and their kind of evolution to this space. Just assume kind of a growth mindset. Everyone's kind of starting in a different place, has different kind of winds at their back, or or headwinds, pushing them forward. Just bear that in mind as we're going through this. So hopefully that's okay with everybody. We can kind of get started. So next we're going to talk about shared language. Let's go deep. So what is a social identity? Um, a social identity is defined as the person's view of who they are based on their membership in a particular group. Typically, the strength of an identity is formed by the lived experiences, good, bad, or otherwise, that that person has. So think about things like gender, race, ethnicity, citizenship, religion, ability, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status. It can really go, you know, indefinitely, right? Um, and I think the other thing that's important also to identify is social identity is intersectional, and that you can be one or both or all of these things, right? You're not just a X or a Y, right? As we go into this. So when we talk about social identity, especially as you talk about people with, intersectional social identities, you know, immigrant, African American, differently able, things like that. You can be that. That all those are components of it. So let's go into what belonging means. So John Powell, who we do a lot of work with at Google, defined belonging as belonging or being fully human means more than just having access. Belonging entails being respected at a basic level that includes the right to both co create and make demands on society. So, to go a little bit deeper than that, right, as we kind of go into this, it really means being understood, respected, and valued, and having a positive identity endorsement. What positive identity endorsement means is it's typically expressed in verbal and nonverbal confirming messages. So everything from signals around you culturally or societally, or around internal kind of inner thoughts, right? That's all part of your belonging, the way it's defined. Again, identity really means, the mindful monitoring of one's verbal and nonverbal attitudes in interacting with dissimilar others and treating others' identities with courteousness, consideration, and dignity. So as we do this talk, just know that we are talking about how you belong as a person, but also how you how you perceive yourself belonging, but also how you perceive others. So it's kind of a bidirectional definition. So as we go into this, we'll have kind of a you know two ways of looking at most of these definitions. So what prevents belonging? Othering is the answer. So as we get into othering, really what this means is an us versus them narrative. So in a stratified community, othering becomes a common practice. This thus creating a narrative flow followed by structural and systematic separates who belongs and who doesn't. This happens when we encounter others who believe things that we don't believe, or values that we don't value, or just anything different about them. This othering and belonging framework can be applied anywhere on planet Earth. It can really be applied anywhere, and we'll get to this in a minute. In the U.S., most evidently is obviously around race and gender dynamics is a very kind of prominent place where othering is rampant. In other countries, it's around religious affiliation, citizenship, socioeconomic status. It really can be applied anywhere. Then we get into power. So power, both power and privilege are kind of interchangeable in some ways, but they can mean different things. Through a DEI lens, power really speaks to the ability to other people and to decide and control who will have access to the resources, direct or indirect, right? How you influence them. Privilege, on the other hand, privilege speaks to not being othered and having standards built around your identity. So think about power, you have the ability to kind of define others. Privilege being that you're not by definition defined, right? So just as we kind of understand these terms, it's important to just make sure we're clear on what we mean by othering, power, and privilege. So as we get into the next slide, so let's get into what is privilege. So privilege is really benefiting from a system without any action on your part So it's really just being kind of by the default position, right, in that system. It also means things that, not having to think about and or maneuver around your existence, your human identity, your perception, anything, right? It's also typically given the benefit of the doubt in many situations. So many assume you are the standard bearer for X society that you are. As we go into this, think about, you know, in a certain predominantly, for example, I'm Muslim, tomorrow's Ramadan. If I privilege in, Saudi Arabia is assuming you're Muslim. That's a place of privilege, right? You're just assume that. The same place at Google, right? Being at Google assumes you're not, you have a degree of some sort, right? You have some kind of technical background. Having that level of framework, that's where privilege actually is. So what it is not, though, it does not mean that you're immune to life's hardships. It is not contingent on how much money you have. It is not indicative of your drive or ambition. It is not a lot of things. Um, it also does not mean that you're a bad or a terrible person. It's just the reality of kind of who you are, where you are kind of in this economic, in this social kind of, fabric. So let's reflect on a couple of questions then. So what othering and belonging dynamics exist in your part of the world? Just think about this to yourself. You don't have to answer. What are the ways power shows up in the workplace, micro and macro? Think about this with your customers as well. So in my mind, for example, coming into a customer engagement with a Google badge and a Google business card and a Google t-shirt, I understand that I have a level of power, right, over somebody because we're being brought in as the experts, right? So I'm fully aware of that. So we have to manage that when going to these customers. The other thing you want to think about also is, what does the word privilege actually mean, right? Is it always negative? Is it always positive? Should it be always anything, right? I think we were talking about this earlier. Working in absolutes is never a good thing, right? So, understanding the word privilege is really important. So, what does it mean to you, and why do you feel like you have those feelings about it? Again, going back to the conversation we had earlier, you know, unsafe versus uncomfortable. Just really ask yourself that question as we get into this. So let's go into kind of a self-awareness exercise. So as we go into, oh, I think I'm ahead here. Sorry. Yeah, here I am. So what we see here is a illustration of how, that's called the power wheel, right? It's really an illustration of how power, identity, and privilege collide. This also helps you see kind of how some of our identities have more power than others. It also notes that the one thing I want to note is the chart is really, salient, and that it could be, viewed differently in different parts of the world. But this is kind of, let's say, a version that we use from the site here. This is also relevant to, you know, I think, to our customers, to our internal stakeholders, et cetera. So what happens is if you work from the outside in, you kind of follow the flow of power, right? So the power in a, you know, whether it's, body size, mental health, sexuality, gender, ability, neurodiversity, education, et cetera, it really kind of flows this way. And again, you have intersectionality where you have some groups that are some people that identify with multiple points of this. So you may, for example, be, you know, um, like I am a cisgender male that's power in some ways. I'm, of an immigrant background that kind of moves me to a different notch. I, have a Muslim belief that may move me to a different notch. I didn't go to, one of the Ivy League schools at Google. That kind of puts you in a different notch. You know, all of these things are kind of salient, when we talk about kind of the power wheel and where we are in this power wheel. So bear that in mind. The one thing I would say though is this wheel, whether it's defined or not, exists, right? In your customers, in your internal engagements with your groups, with your, social circles, everywhere. It's there, right? It's just there. We can't, it might not be defined as like a pie like this, but it's definitely there, right? There is a kind of power privilege position in the middle, and then everything kind of flows out from there. So, but you have to, I think, go into it with eyes wide open and understand kind of what that looks like. I give the example of, age is not on here, for example. So as you get to a certain point in your career, you're like, I wonder if not being, my 20s or 30s is actually a disadvantage to me in this particular role, right? Again, also religion or religious belief or practice, also not in this chart. So that could be also another way of looking at it. Again, it's really transferable, depending on what group you're working with. So definitely something you should take into consideration. So the one thing I'll kind of you know bring in here is, just think about this to yourself. You don't have to answer now in the chat, but are your identities salient within the power market, or close to the power, or are they on the edges, right? Or do they kind of flow around the edges, right? And also, how dynamic are they? Because a lot of these things change over time. And how dynamic are they based on the group, so in time and space? And in what ways are some of your identities marginalized while others are privileged? So just think about, how is it that that you may or may not have even realized um, that you are privileged in other ways, where you may have thought, okay, well, I have a master's degree, that's great, but maybe there's somebody with a PhD, or you may have thought about, okay, I own a property, maybe being renting is puts you in a different position, right? So just think about these kinds of things as you kind of navigate the power dynamic. I'm going to share a quick video. Hopefully this works. We did a quick test beforehand, but this is it's a privilege walk. It's an exercise that was done.
Some people are born into families where they have to walk miles just to get water. All I have to do is turn on a faucet. That's privilege.
If you have ever tried to change your speech, if you were embarrassed about your clothes or house, if you would never think twice about calling the police when trouble occurs.
I think privilege is when some people have some things and other people don't have things.
I feel privilege is something that you don't even really have control over.
I think it'd be silly for me to say I don't have a fair amount of privilege, considering like the country I live in and the job I get to do and the college I was allowed to go to.
I suppose being a white male will help me end up somewhere towards the front, but I'll take a few steps back from being gay.
I don't think I'll make it to the front. I think I'll maybe be in the middle. That's just a gut feeling I have.
If your parents work nights and weekends to support your family, take one step back. If you can show affection for your romantic partner in public without fear of ridicule or violence, take one step forward. If you were embarrassed about your clothes or house while growing up, take one step back. If you have ever been diagnosed as having a physical or mental illness or disability, take one step back. If you have ever been bullied or made fun of based on something you can't change, take one step back. If you get time off for your religious holidays, take one step forward. If you came from a supportive family environment, if you can see a doctor whenever you feel the need, if you are able to move through the world without fear of sexual assault, if you took out loans for your education, if there were more than 50 books in your house growing up. So these are your final positions.
I think it felt kind of strange for everyone.
It's a hard thing to discuss or even reflect on. It was very awkward.
I think when you can represent it so visually like this and so immediately, it definitely takes on a new form.
I think we were like all joking around in the beginning. It was pretty lighthearted, and as soon as the questions started coming in, the mood shifted immediately, and we all it was just silent.
Just looking back and seeing like a bunch of people behind you is not a good feeling.
It's like weird how you want to like hold on to explaining a certain privilege, like, oh, but that's not actually me because like I had to work really hard for that. So it's weird to like take a step forward when you feel like you're taking a step forward with someone else, but you wear a lot of the baggage of like how those things were hard.
It was like more emotional than I thought it would be.
It reminded me of when They talk about slavery in high school, and you feel like angry for a few days, but then you just realize like, this is how it is.
For me, it was kind of frustrating almost to look back and see how much further some people were behind me, and realizing that, you know, a lot of that stuff, no amount of hard work or even legislation can make up that gap.
It's interesting being an Asian American because you're not really sure where you fall on the spectrum of privilege.
I know that for me, one of the reasons I ended up so far back was that there are questions around safety as an African American, as a woman, as a gay woman. There are just so many different ways that I don't feel safe.
I feel like I just learned to be grateful for what you have. You know, we're in such a huge society where it's always complaining about what you don't have.
It just shows you that for some families, like each family, you're meant to do better. My grandparents did good, my parents did good, and I'll do even better.
I do think if you're not like aware of privilege, you should do this exercise, but it's more complicated.
So yeah, that was powerful. Honestly, the first time I watched that video, it was very eye-opening, and I realized there was a lot of, it was really powerful. I'll say it that way. And I think, you know, I have people in my family, people in my community who are disabled. They're hard of hearing, they're blind, and would they even be able to participate in an exercise like this, just to even get through there? People may not even understand the questions because they're, you know, immigrants and non-native English speakers. So we think about all the other, you know, the prism of kind of what power represents. It really is a big message. So it's important to kind of understand that. So let's get into kind of allyship. Allyship in the workplace, allyship specifically with your customers. So, you know, the allyship, the way we define it is really supporting marginalized groups to which one does not identify. At Google, for Googlers, which means at Google for our customers, this looks like Google is advocating for equity using one's membership in an advantage group. So essentially what you want to do is, as a member of the privileged group with that power, you want to use that power for allyship, right? As opposed to using it for what we talked about earlier, which is othering, right? You want to use it for allyship. So here are some just common, you know, misconceptions about allyship, and here's what it is, right? Allyship is being aware of your privilege, taking on a struggle of your own, standing up for what is right, giving the benefits of your privilege to those who don't have any, recognizing that even though you are hurting, the conversation is not about you. This isn't really hard for a lot of folks. And then making mistakes and correcting behavior. It's really about doing that. What it is not, right, is also important, which is it's not expecting to be taught. It's not comparing your own struggles. It's not assuming you know how to fix the issue. It's not taking credit for the work. It's not assuming that every member of a marginalized group feels oppressed, right? What this means for me personally is you have to essentially give space for those who need it, and sometimes you give that space, and sometimes they have to take it themselves, right? I think understanding your position as an ally is really important when it comes to the individual, the group, and kind of the power position you have in that situation, right? Especially when you think about this for in the world where I live, right, which is dealing with our customers. You know, our allyship, it is implicit in a lot of ways rather than explicit. So I don't say you should really do, you know, I'll give you another example from my real life. You should really give them the end of Ramadan off, right? Because that's the day they break their fast. I say, hey, I'm taking off as a Muslim. My day's off, right? I'm taking off that day. I wonder if there's any Muslims in your organization who want to take off, right? Or and this is something that I know well, right? Dealing with it in real time. But it can be anything. It can be anything to do. This especially happened a lot with as we were dealing with COVID, and we were thinking, well, we're doing this remotely. You know, maybe check with your people. You know, see if they have any need for those kinds of accommodations. And also, and there's also, I think, a different mindset around, speaking up for a person, and then whether you let that person speak up for themselves, right? I think you have to create the space for that person to do it. Again, you do not want to be the person who is, um, you know, the one who's always, you know, plowing through allyship by force, right? Some people need to take that space themselves, and your job is to just create the space and give them the space back up in a lot of ways. So let's walk through some examples of privilege that we see a lot. So we see this. So there's a couple of examples. So many marginalized identities have had pressure to change their speech or mannerisms or et cetera to seem more professional, right? This could be in the form of hairstyle, dress, speech patterns, speech, even accent. And what you have to understand, recognize that position, right? The privileged experience, people don't really have to deal with this, right? So how you show up for marginalized folks is how this shows up for people who are marginalized. So Black plus women are coached to abandon their ethnic hairstyles during job interviews altogether. I think people with foreign or southern accents in the U.S. are coached to embrace the speech patterns of predominant. I know from my culture, for the people of the Arab American Muslim community, especially post 9/11, they were using names like Mo instead of Muhammad, Sam instead of Osama, shaving their beards. Women were taking off their scarves. It was there, right? That's the reality of that. So, being expecting to, see that in the workplace is not healthy, right? So this is how kind of that privilege shows up in the workspace. If you're on the other side of that and you never had to think about this, then you're probably coming from a position of privilege. It's just something to bear in mind. And then we have another example here. You're a privileged position is you're not mistaken for somebody of lower seniority. Again, this happens often, especially with women, where women are assumed to be in lesser roles than their counterparts, and during their first encounter. And the other thing that can happen a lot of times is the work itself may not be credited to this underrepresented group. So if I use the term URG, that's what I mean. So a lot of times you'll, if you, again, if and you don't know until you've seen this in action. I think a lot of people on this call have seen this, but where you actually go to a meeting, you go to any kind of event or any kind of customer engagement, and you're introducing people, and you're assumed to be lower than your position, only because of you're part of an underrepresented group, right? Right. No matter what it is, pick one or many. It happens all the time. And let's talk about allyship in the workplace now. So allyship in the workplace is really recognizing your peers who hold marginalized or underrepresented identities. They just know, right? They may have additional barriers to success than others. They may experience prejudice from customers and partners and each other. They may not feel included, valued, or celebrated. They may experience difficulty connecting with their teammates, and they may be excluded from projects just because of their otherness, right? Because they're part of an underrepresented group. And I think, sorry, jump ahead. And I think what you want to do here is kind of, as an individual from a position of power, privilege, under any realm, right? You really have to work on eliminating these hurdles to reduce bias, elevating your peers within the team so that they can strive. Again, make space, show up, be an ally for those folks on your team. And then we'll get to kind of some of the methods here in a little bit, right? Here's some of the allyship in action. So we're going to walk through some real life scenarios here. So a marginalized experience, again, are pressured to change their speech. So how would you act as an ally in this situation? Same situation, how would you act as an ally? You can expand your acceptance of what professional work means. Abandon what the majority norms are around culture, around hairstyle, cultural expression, or dress. I'll give you the other thing you can do also is don't judge people based on their ethnic culture expressions. Develop your listening skills, cross accents, challenge others who don't judge, uh, don't who don't judge or accept the practices of others. I'll give you a good example of this. You know, we recently got, my wife covers her hair. One of her things of her job is she has to be on camera all the time, and obviously you're on camera. She wants to cover her hair, so she felt uncomfortable. She's like, I'm not going to be able to cover my hair all the time. I'm home, I need to be able to turn my camera on and off depending on what the call is. So I think abandoning that norm at work for her was very important. She actually advocated for herself. She spoke up, spoke to her peers, and they were able to kind of push that as a new norm. Um, I think just being flexible with what you accept as normal or professional, quote unquote, expands the position of privilege, right? What it does is, okay, this is actually not abnormal. It's not othered, right? You're actively, by being an ally, essentially unlocking the othering, and you're kind of bringing more and more of that into the standard position of privilege or power. Again, another example, right? We talked about this earlier. Mistaken for a senior, for low seniority. How do you act as an ally? When accompanying somebody from an underrepresented group in a meeting, make the introduction or right, celebrate the efforts when they're not around, right? So I think speaking highly of your peers, making the introduction to yourself, correcting them in the moment, especially if you're with your customers, definitely helps to, I think, showing up as an ally for yourself and also showing up as an ally for your teammate. This is also, I think, good when you're working with newer customers who may not have this, this culture yet. I think it's important for you as if you're dealing with as a customer engagement, again, the world where I live. If I see groups that are doing really well that are underrepresented, I'm sure to highlight those folks. I don't necessarily, they have limited visibility and limited kind of reach, right? When you're coming in from Google to a customer, but in general, you can say, oh, so and so did a great job, by the way. I don't know if I'm sure you know this. So and so did a really good job with what they did. Again, and a lot of ways you can do this is you can do them kind of correct in the moment, right? Or kind of behind the scenes, and just kind of celebrate their efforts when they're not around. Another way, it can be assumed. This is a really tough one. It can be assumed to reference that you're part of a diversity quota. I think the number one way to tackle this on is to challenge it heads on, right? I think we at Google, at least, and we try to put this to our customers, is there's not it's not necessarily a diversity quota, it's diversity addition, right? It's because it's part of the addition that person represents to our community, and the addition they can bring to kind of a blind spot that we have, either within our team or with the service we deliver to our customers or to the users that we have, kind of broader Google, right? So if you hear someone saying it, we immediately want to challenge that and refute it by highlighting the strengths that person represents. The flip side of that is, don't assume that person bears the entire burden of their group, right? So you want to be careful with this. Say, oh, we brought on a Muslim because he represents all Muslims. That's not true for me, I hope, right? I don't want that. I don't want that on my back, So it's similar with other groups. And then as we kind of go through, let me go to the next one here. I know we're running short on time. So you use personal vacation days to celebrate a religious holiday because Google doesn't observe them or other countries don't observe them. Again, as a leader, you can act as a customer as a leader. You mandate no meeting days on religious holidays. You can do a swap. You can ask your team, ask your peer to kind of, share that ahead of time with you. You can do a lot. This happens with me a lot. I'm a Muslim living in America. We don't have Ramadan or Eid or anything off. You have to essentially speak up for yourself. And what I do then is, as a, I think I mentioned this earlier, when dealing with my customers, I flag this as well. Say, by the way, I'm taking off for Eid, and I completely transparent. I'm not saying I'm taking off for some time off. I'm not saying I'm taking off for vacation. I'm saying I'm taking off because it's a religious holiday, and I'm forward with it. and just the same way I would be if it were you know, anything else I would need to take off for, right? Say, I'm not gonna, dance around it. You got to really kind of be that, and I think represent that kind of by example for your community. So how do you activate your allyship? So I think, the one thing you can do is address othering and pay attention to who's participating and who's not, who's in and who's out within your team and your customer. I think you also want to address microaggressions. Microaggressions are a real, I think, kind of death by a thousand cuts situation, right? In that, you know, even if the things that you get, like, oh, you don't look like someone in tech, oh, I didn't know you look like that, or you speak so clearly for somebody of your background, right? Those are small cuts, but those cuts, man, they really cut deep. I think it really does kind of tear away at a culture. So you have to address these microaggressions. I think also creating psychological safety in environments is also really key. So inclusive environments that are psychologically safety. What we mean by psychological safety is a team that is, you know, a team that is diverse, a team that is open, a team that is transparent, a team that is fair. And this can also extend into your customer engagements. Both, again, think about your customers as being your paying customers that you're working for, your clients, but also your stakeholders internally, right? Because we're all essentially a product for ourselves, right? So as we deal with that, make sure that you're creating, fostering, harboring, and exhibiting a environment of psychological safety. The other thing too is, I think, precise language. Precise language is very important. So precise language around pronouns, around certain keywords that you want to stay away from, not just the big words, right? Everyone knows don't curse, don't use vulgar language, don't use racist, sexist speech. Everyone should know that, I hope, right? But it's also around small things, small little, like, terminology. So I'll give you an example here where I was guilty of this early on. I say, oh, we're almost at the goal line. Almost at the goal line with a project. We're right there. We're at the 5-yard line. We just got to get in there and go to the goal line. If you don't know football, American football, you don't know what the heck that means. So I had to keep changing my language and calibrating it to a way that say, okay, we're almost there. We're so close. We're 5% away from finishing the project, and just be really precise with your language, because I think that language barrier, that using imprecise language could be perceived as a microaggression, right? Depending on who's receiving it. So the other term I hear a lot is baptism by a fire, right? You hear this a lot. Baptism is a very, it's a Christian thing, right? And if you're not Christian, you don't know what baptism even means. You don't know what that term means at all. So I think it's really hard to capture all of them. Just be, try to be like as precise as you can with the language that you're using, especially as it relates to power, right? So especially if you're in a position of power based on your privilege, and you're communicating kind of out and down, right, in that power wheel, your words weigh more than they would otherwise. And at Google, we're trying to be really mindful of how we calibrate the power dynamic with certain language, and how that language can be itself create psychological unsafety, right, and be perceived as a microaggression, right, and that language itself can other. So very kind of open about that, very I would say fluid situation, because it is a situation that is constantly evolving depending on the groups. So I think quick actions to take towards allyship. So top 10. So diversify your inner circle. So get to know folks who are different than you. If you look around the room, and if you look around your favorite call list, if you look around your favorite friends, if you look around your top, and they all kind of look, act, and believe the same way that you do, you need to diversify that circle a little bit, right? So it's called proximity bias. Get the people around you to be more diverse. You want to amplify the work of underrepresented communities, even when they're not around. So definitely when they are around, but especially when they're not around. You want to invite underrepresented groups to high-profile meetings or events. You want to invite them into stretch assignments. You want to share the mic, and you want to send rewards or thanks or acknowledgments. So I'll give you an example of this underrepresented group. So, you know, Google recently was releasing a statement on anti-Semitism. It was spiking last year. Same with like anti-Asian hate. That was all spiking last year. Google invited all of the groups that represent any of our resource groups, or Interbelief Network, our African American community, our Latinx community, our LGBT plus community. All of those communities were invited to say, look, we're going to release this message. Is there anything you want to add to it? Is there anything you want to contribute to it? And what we do is we invite them as well to things, and we were invited as representatives of those groups to things like product launches, policy reviews of like YouTube hate speech, or accessibility reviews. The one group that's always kind of, not always, but like sometimes disregarded here is the disabled or differently abled community. We have a strong kind of disability alliance as well. They're brought in too and say, is this accessible, right? Is this phone accessible? Does it have all the features you need if you are hard of hearing, or if you are an amputee, or if you are deaf, or if you anything, right? So definitely bring as many diverse people into your circle as possible, especially as you're dealing with customers or products or impactful impactful work, right? So if you're making a self-driving car, or something really like a really kind of moonshot situation, you want to bring as many people in, because you don't want it to be to be focused on one group, not the other. A good example of this would be the phone that Google released recently. They brought in when they were calibrating the lens, they were like, one of our problems in the past was the lens was not capturing different colored people correctly, right? They brought in a whole lot of engineering time and a lot of effort to kind of up that to represent everybody in their quality testing and quality in their engineering. And they actually calibrated the next release, so it's actually better than the previous one. So to kind of do away with that. And I think the other thing you want to do is just nominate people for high visibility projects. You want to endorse and promote. You want to acknowledge and incentivize participation. So this one's also key. So we want to definitely I know it's hard, and it's the DEI is like the it's like the key, like the cool word for 2022. But I think you want to incentivize participation in DEI activities, either by learning plans, or by forums, or by guest speakers, or sessions like this. You want to acknowledge and incentivize that. So I think we're going to go through I Am Remarkable workshop after this, but as you go through that, you'll see what kind of things are out there. Definitely build that into your customer culture, build that into your team culture. And then what it does is does the next thing, which is it holds team members to inclusive norms and in general, right? So I think by building in this culture of like inclusivity and of diversity and of inclusion and of allyship and of understanding power and privilege, I think what it does overall, right, is it just elevates the conversation. It takes it really to the next level. And what happens is it becomes like, not to sound too cheesy, but it does become kind of like a light that emanates out. So everything you touch, from a product perspective, from a team perspective, from a customer perspective, from a even your documentation, you'll start cleaning up the language and cleaning up some of the font sizes, so they're more, it's not like yellow on white, so somebody who's not who is visually impaired can't see it, or things like that, right? All of that will essentially kind of flow out of it. So lots more out there. I think what I want to really close on is when you lean into allyship, just don't be afraid, right? You're not going to be fully aware of the experiences of others. Don't expect to. I just cannot put myself in somebody else's situation. It's okay, right? And again, be vulnerable, be open about what you're willing to learn, what you want to learn. It's also I think sometimes hard to understand that people you can be in denial about the experiences of others, just whether you want to or not, right? Sometimes you could just be like, man, I cannot believe it was that bad for that person, but it actually is. So just drop that that um that pre-notion and just say, I really I really need to understand where they are, and also like comprehending these feelings for their first time are hard as well. So as you're getting into it, you're really going to start saying, do I really, how am I feeling right now? Like, I don't know. I don't, this is new to me, right? It's like being able to, it's like putting on, color glasses after being able to see only black and white for your entire life. It really does change your view on the world. Um, you're also going to feel, I think, in a lot of ways, like we call it de-skilled. So the tools that you had may need to be revisited. May be challenged. And then you know you're going to constantly be feeling in a state of just where you need to learn and deepen your understanding, build new norms, habits, skill sets. There's a lot out there with what you can do, but I think the key thing for you is just understanding that it exists, right? Understanding that as an ally you have a position, and that if you're not, um, you know, and again, I don't want to work in absolutes, but you know, if you don't see yourself as an ally, then you're not seeing the power that you hold in those positions. Because I think everybody holds some level of power, in some positions. And I think what you want to do is just commit to talking to others, safe space, right? Learn more about other belonging in the context of your own history and identity. So really kind of double click on yourself, right? Like, who am I as a person? Educate yourself on different perspectives and belief systems. Empathy is key, right? With everything that we do. I kind of lead with customer empathy, lead with interpersonal empathy. Um, and then, don't be afraid of being uncomfortable as you kind of build that muscle memory, right? So what that actually means for you as an individual dealing with, you know, dealing with allyship and power and privilege. So I think one thing to take away, just, everyone jot it down to yourself, put it on a post-it note. What's one action you can take post this session? Next thing is, how will you hold yourself accountable? Is it with a team, with a person, with the mirror? It's all good. Next thing is, how can you measure your own growth as an ally? Just, when it comes to your management style, when it comes to your customers, just find a way to measure it. Again, it doesn't have to be, a report card or anything. It's just something we want to hold yourself to. These are the three, I think, takeaways and commitment. Thank you all for attending. I'm kind of happy to stick around, and I think my information is available. So if anybody needs to contact me, feel free. Definitely open to having more conversations about this. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Sabri.
Awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to introduce Danielle really fast before I let her take over. Danielle is known as the Flutter Fly. She is a Flutter advocate and developer with over 10 years experience. And so now we're going to hear about her experience of flying with Flutter. Thank you so much, Danielle.
That's right. And to be clear, it's not over 10 years of Flutter experience. It's not, I've been developing a long time, but nobody's got over 10 years of Flutter experience.
No, it hasn't been around that long, has it?
It has not. So I guess before we start recording, I'll just real quickly show off. This is Dash, and he's the mascot of Dart, which is the language that Flutter is written in. And so this talk is really more of a soft talk with kind of my journey. So it's flying with Flutter, and it's my journey, and it's kind of using Flutter as a metaphor for things I've learned along the way and things I've experienced. And so anyway, let's get going. So where do I want to go click on here? I think I just want to do this. There we go. Perfect. All right. So I'm Danielle Cox. I'm a proud graduate of the University of Oklahoma. I think I mentioned earlier I have my my OU cup here even. And I'm an experienced software engineer with well north of 10 years of experience. I'm one of the organizers of the Flutteristas. And so a lot of you, if you're interested in Flutter at all, we should talk about joining the Flutteristas. It's a great organization. I'll talk about that later. And as the picture should show, I'm not afraid to reach for the stars. You know, when you reduce yourself to a set of bullet points, sometimes you have to leave out things. So, I'm a proud mommy to an African gray parrot. I'm a photographer. I like nature. I like astronomy, obviously, things like that. But these are the ones that are relevant to this talk. And I work for a company called Ardley, and I just figured I'd put a shout out to them here. And straight from our investor documents, we are an enterprise software company developing solutions for the legacy challenges facing the U.S. mortgage market. Now, ultimately what we do is we try to keep people with their same servicers when they go to refinance, and we try to connect them back up with the same people they were with so that they don't lose them to someone else when they refinance. And so we're helping both our clients and their customers both, save money, presumably. And anyway, I work on a Flutter app, which is the app that the actual end customers use to fill out their application. And so that's what I do with them. And Flutter, I'm presuming, since this is a Google G2G meetup thing, I'm presuming most people have heard of Flutter, but if you haven't, straight from their website, Flutter transforms the app development process, build, test, and deploy beautiful mobile, web, desktop, and embedded apps from a single code base. Use a language called Dart. And anyway, it's a lot of fun to work with. And, this is a pretty soft talk, but if anybody wants to talk to me later about actually learning Flutter, I'm happy to help with that too. And of course, we're here to celebrate International Women's Day. So happy March 8th, 2022, anybody watching on video. But for the rest of us, we all know that we're holding this a little bit later and we are just trying to celebrate. And I think that's a great idea because we deserve more than one day anyway. So that's why we're here. And all right, so I want to talk a little bit about lessons I've learned from Flutter. And there are lessons I've probably already known, but there are things that I am that have really been put in focus with Flutter. So you may be wondering, why am I up here talking? Well, the short answer is because Justine asked me, and I think it's because I'm experienced. I also think it's kind of because I'm old. I've been around a while. I'm actually going to be back in Oklahoma on Saturday for a week from tomorrow for the first time in maybe the 2000s, and I'm going to a place called Turner Falls, and I just realized it's going to be my first time to actually have a senior discount. So that's kind of scary, and I really think it's because I like to tell stories, and with Justine, I've told her lots of war stories about how things were back in the good old days and things like that. So I think that's probably why I'm here. Now, once again, if you don't know anything about Flutter, it's an open source framework, and it's the source code in open source software is available to all users. And if you need to, you can work with it. It comes with licenses, gives you permissions and stuff like that. So there definitely are pros and cons to open source. And so the first pro is that it's usually very cost effective. Typically, it's free, to go ahead and use it. And that's, we'll talk about hidden costs later, but it's typically cost effective. It gives you a lot of flexibility. If I need to go make changes, I can go make changes. I can, put up PRs. I can try to share them. I can keep my own changes to myself. I can go get different plugins, things like that. We'll talk about. But it's very flexible. And open software is typically very reliable because it's created by skilled and talented people and looked over by other skilled and talented people. So that's always a big deal. And one of the things I didn't find when I was trying to look for what were actually pluses and minuses out there, one thing I didn't see, but I think is real, is you get a feeling of accomplishment when you work on something that other people are using. It's nice. And the number of people that are going to use Ardley software is pretty small, but if I put a contribution out there, then I think that's actually something that will help me feel a lot better. I think we can all learn from that. But there's some minuses. So one of them is maintenance. You've got to kind of do your maintenance yourself in a lot of cases because it's very flexible. It's out there a lot, but you got to figure stuff out. There's typically not a phone number to call. You have to figure stuff out yourself. And then we have customization can be hard at times because once again, sometimes it's paralysis by analysis. Sometimes it is actually going through and trying to figure out how to do something. And that brings up another organization I'd like to kind of talk about, which is the Flutter Bounty Hunters. And this is an organization I'm part of that started by Matt Carroll. And basically, we're trying to bridge that gap of some of those minuses. So, if you need help with either building something open source, Flutter and Dart tool kind of thing. If your team is blocked and you need help getting it going, if you'll just save money having someone that's an expert that can do it faster. We've been doing this for a while, and all of that, we embrace the community. So anyway, if you have any Flutter needs, the Flutter Bounty Hunters is out there, and we'd be happy to help you out with things. And Matt Carroll, if anybody doesn't know, he's super declarative on the social media stuff, and he used to be a Googler himself. All right, so now let's start looking at some lessons that could be applied to life from taking a look at open source software. And one of the first things is a little bit of a hard lesson is, I'm pretty smart. If I walk into a room of random people, I'm usually one of the smarter people there. But as smart as I am, as a group, we are much smarter. We're able to figure things out together better. And that's one of the things that open software has taught me. And reinventing the wheel can be tedious and often frustrating. In many of my previous jobs, we've gone and we've invented stuff that other people have done, whether it's sending out emails or whether it's generating bills or things like that. And these are things that have been solved, but because of more of a fractured mentality, the big companies say, well, we need to write it ourselves, or there early on was fears of open source software. So this is something that's taught me, is that if we can avoid reinventing the wheel and use stuff that's already been built, that's going to be better. And this goes back to what I said earlier. It feels good to contribute and be recognized. I mean, I really like that. When someone recognizes me and knows me and things like that. But it's a little bit of a downside here. I do want to point out that free things can be expensive. So once again, if you're using the wrong thing because it's free and you're working at it, that can be expensive in missed deadlines. It can be expensive in money, time, mistakes, reputation, things like that. So we do want to make sure that we are picking the right parts of what's out there to do things with. Now, I grew up in Oklahoma. I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, and I didn't have very many role models for things, especially in the world of tech. I didn't have a lot of role models, period, but definitely no female role models. Just as a fun little side note, I got a chance to meet Tim Curry, and he was Dr. Frankenfurter in Rocky Horror. And that back when I was growing up, that was a Friday night ritual for a lot of people. And as someone that was definitely not, normal in those worlds, it was neat seeing other people act up weird. So when I met him, I made the comment about growing up queer in Oklahoma in the 80s. And he just reached over, touched my hand, and said, "Oh, that must have been so hard for you." And it kind of was, but it was nice having some understanding there. But let's talk about some women role models that we do have out there. Okay, Lady Ada Lovelace. I don't know how many of you. This is the kind of talk I would much rather give in person, just so I could see the reactions of people and stuff like that. But I would bet that if I were to ask people, what decade did the first computer program get written? I bet a lot of people would actually say the 40s, but they'd probably be wrong because they wouldn't be saying the 1840s. So Ada Lovelace, she was the daughter of Lord Byron, the poet. And when she was still a teenager, she met a guy named Charles Babbage. And he got the British government to pay him to build a machine that he didn't finish, started working on the next machine, never finished it. But the second was called the analysis engine. And what was special about that was, she had fallen in love with this stuff. And so she translated an article that a guy had written in Italian for that. And in the margin, she called it notes, but in the margin, she put in stuff you could do with it. And upon analysis, when it was kind of rediscovered in the 80s, they decided that was the first computer program ever written right there. So in the 1840s, Ada Lovelace had wrote the first program. Another person I think is a good role model here is Rear Admiral Grace Hopper. And I knew about her fairly early on, but she's the person that was the driving force behind COBOL. So her story is during World War II, she decided to join the Navy as a wave. And they wouldn't take her because she was too old, but she then joined the reserves and worked her way through that and kept helping with some of their computer stuff there. Got out. She was a PhD doctor, and so she started working on computer science type problems And she felt that, you know, normal programming languages were not accessible enough because people weren't used to writing in symbols, for example. And so she thought, wouldn't it be nice if people could write programs basically in English? And which is kind of interesting given our previous talk with making sure of different languages and stuff. So this would definitely be a privilege of knowing English for writing COBOL. But so she was part of the driving force behind inventing COBOL. And I can't say I love COBOL, but I have programmed in it for money. And so it's a neat story on that. And then later on in her life, when she was getting up there in years, she was what we would, I think today would call like a science advocate. You know, she would go around and go on talk shows, things like that. And she'd bring around these pieces of wire that were like 11.8 inches tall or long. And she would use that to demonstrate some of the problems with the speed of light with, like, for example, satellite communications, because that's a nanosecond. That's how long a nanosecond is. As computers got faster, you know, I saw her on, I think, the David Letterman show with a little package of pepper from, you know, like a Wendy's or something, and she said those are picoseconds. So, you know, it's amazing how speeds got along. But that was Rear Admiral Grace Hopper. Dorothy Vaughn is someone I only learned about when the book Hidden Figures came out, but she's a pretty good role model. The other two were probably came from privilege, for sure. Lady Ada did, but Dorothy was an African American, and she wasn't even allowed to work in the same room as you know, white people. So that was interesting. And she was part of a group. They called them computers, because that's what they did, is they computed, you know, trajectories, things like that, for NASA in the early days. And she saw them bring in a computer into the what's now the Johnson Space Center, and she realized that that was going to be a big deal and it was important. And so she taught herself Fortran and really worked hard toward building the computer program there at NASA. And she did this as, you know, an African American female, which is two huge strikes at that back in the early 60s, like that. I recommend probably the book is slightly more accurate than the movie, but the movie may be more accessible. It's a very good movie. I want to mention one more, which is Lynn Conway, and her story is interesting because she was, you know, assigned male at birth, and she worked at Intel, and she was part of some of the early processing logic that we use today, take for granted, out of sequence. I think it's what they called it, you know, where the processor can stay busy at times without having to wait for a previous operation to finish. And then she transitioned to be a female, and Intel basically scrubbed her from all the documentation and everything. And so someone finally tracked her down, I think, and researched it. And that's how I found out about her. But those are some great role models I think that we have. And I think that the Flutter team itself does a good job at trying to make sure they've got strong female people in there. You know, one of the developers I think that we know the most on there is probably Kate Lovett. You know, so that's kind of nice. If anybody's dealing with Flutter out in the social media stuff, you probably know Neeli. And you know, the DevRel team just hired another female, another member. That's what I was trying to say, but she's a female and she's also Asian, so that's kind of neat. Khan. So, you know, I think they work toward making sure that stuff is good. So, you know, the talk we heard before, I think really kind of fits in and proves that they are working toward that. So now, when we talk about Flutter, one of the coolest things we have is it's called hot restart. There's also hot reload, and the idea is that, you know, you've gone like 5 screens down in your program and you're testing it, and you want to make a change to the formatting, and you make the change and you save it, and you go back. It's already there. You don't have to wait for it to reload the program on there, but you also don't even have to go and re-enter all the steps to get down to that screen. That's stateful hot reload, and the hot restart is so, you know, when you get rid of the state part. So I probably had that backwards. I probably should put reload first and then restart, because reload's definitely cooler. But so to kind of tie this in there, I want to tell a little bit of my origin story. So I already said I grew up in Oklahoma, and in 1981 for Christmas, I talked to anyone that was going to give me a Christmas present, I said, please, please, please give me cash. And I got all the cash I could get for Christmas, threw in my entire life savings, which I think was $100 at the time. And I bought myself a Commodore VIC-20. Well, a Commodore VIC-20 and a tape deck. That was we didn't have disk drives, we had cassette tapes on there. So with that, I worked forward until I got to studying computer science at the University of Oklahoma. And I was definitely on a direct course. I knew that's what I was going to do. I was going to go to OU and I was going to study, computer science and be a programmer. And while I was in college, I had several jobs. I worked for the IRS. Actually, I was one of the early people there. One of the fun things about that is I earned an award the first day I was there. It took him a month to get it to me, but I called to my boss's office with a letter from like his boss's boss saying that I'd done a good job. Please thank me for them. So I thought that was pretty cool. I programmed in COBOL for the city of Oklahoma City and came up with some really cool speed improvements, using my experience from the Unix world. So I had several side gigs, like before a lot of people had side hustles. I was doing things like inventory for a ceramics petroleum company, the ceramics that were used in the petroleum fields, things like that. And then I went to work for Encore Computer up in Massachusetts, and then moved to Florida, 31 years ago. And I had all that going on, and I kept working different jobs until 2004. And then, like so many of us, I took a 10-year hiatus. I worked in a family business that was not a computer science business at all. I did dabble a little bit, like I wrote some Android stuff just to kind of keep going, but it definitely was not a programming lifestyle at all. And one of the things that was kind of cool from that is I did find out that I missed programming because, like I said, I was on a straight line straight to it. And I'd often wondered, well, what if I had thought about doing a different career? How would that have worked? And so, at least I know I made a pretty good choice because I definitely enjoy programming still. And then I got kind of lucky and I found my previous boss / coworker. We'd watched the first three Star Wars, or the episodes 1, 2, and 3 of Star Wars together while I was working with him. And I had called him up when Star Wars Episode 7 was coming out and said, "Hey, you want to go see it?" And he says, "Can't, I already got my tickets, but do you want a job?" So then I began my second professional life. And so I was kind of lucky because I was working with people that knew my skills. I did surprise myself at what I remembered. And I kept working on side projects at this point just to help, improve my skills, my breadth of things. And I found Flutter in January of 19 at a dev fest, which is really nice. And part of why I think this is relevant for what we're talking about here is I think that a lot of us women have taken, for different reasons, these extended breaks in the middle of our careers, whether it's to raise kids, whether it's to take care of our parents, and yes, I know that men do it too, but I think often, females, A, do it, and B, kind of get presumed we do it more often, so I kind of want to be a little bit of inspiration there as, if you need to do it and move on, and we can, there is life after, and you can keep doing things if that's what you choose to do. Now, another thing that we talked about with Flutter is it has multi-platform support. And that was part of that definition I gave. And one of the really cool things about it is the fact that it runs on Android, it runs on iOS, it runs on web, it runs on, Mac OS, on Windows, on Linux. And I'm not sure what embedded systems that they run on. Probably they're going to be Linux based, but it runs on lots of places. And I think there's lessons we can learn from that too. One is, you can be pulled in multiple directions, and it's difficult to excel at many things. I think that's true. There's the story about the jack of all trades, master of none. I think that can be a problem, but we're in a situation where we need to be good at a lot of things, but that's hard to do. And once again, I almost didn't put this bullet item in here because I want to be very careful with how I say it. This is not a female only trait, but we're often trained at this, whether it's, listening to someone while, feeding our kid, or whether it's, you know, uh, a lot of distractions are probably based on kids, but we're used to that. I think men do it too, but I'm pointing out the fact, since this is in celebration of International Women's Day, that we're often trained at this, at being able to pay attention to more things, and it helps us a little bit at going in different directions. But the secret is to build a support team, and whether that's in the world of programming, that's having experts you can call and ask about questions, or whether it's consultants you can bring in to do part of the thing that they know well that you don't. But I think in your own your home life, I think it's important too, whether that's being able to bring in someone to do the cleaning for you, or whether it's having someone you can call to watch maybe my parrot while I am having to go out and do something. Having a support team is important, and I think that's a solution for being pulled in too many directions, is to try to work on that. We also need to work on big picture thinking. The work we do is very rarely it's in the vacuum. It's part of a bigger whole. And so an example I've got on this is when I was having a lot of work done on my home. If you would have a worker come in and you were telling them to, I don't know, move this door, and they come in and it's clearly the wrong door. They didn't care. Their order said do this. They were going to do that. I actually had, someone was supposed to, we had a screened-in enclosure in the back of our house over our pool, and they were supposed to separate it and do it. Well, the people came out, and that before the person was supposed to pull it back so they could do the work on the roof. So they just cut it off, so they could do their job, because they had their job to do. So I think that we need to learn that's not the way to do things. That's just a very expensive problem to have, to cause problems, because you're getting your work done and you're impeding other people. And I want to say that the particular knowledge that you bring to a problem is important. And what I know is not going to be what Justine knows. It's not going to be what Sabri knows. It's different. And that's why diversity is important. And that's part of why I really enjoyed listening to Sabri's talk earlier, is the fact that there's value in this, and we come around and do things. So now another thing that Flutter has, and a lot of open source software does in general, but Flutter specifically has a robust package environment. We have a site called pub.dev, and you can go and you can find packages that do almost anything. So problems have been solved already. So it helps us find existing solutions. Again, I said it earlier, but reinventing the wheel is expensive. If I can find a package that does what I need it to do versus me spending 3 days working on it, it's usually better for me to take that package. It also helps with collective knowledge. And what I mean by that is, I mean that if we're all learning a lot of the same stuff, that makes us more interchangeable when it comes to a ticket getting assigned, things like that, someone getting hired coming in new. And so I think that using existing solutions to do things helps with people that are, like I said, if I hire someone else, or if I go to work for another company, it'll help out with that. And I think it helps encourage open source development. And part of the reason for that in Flutter specifically is you get statistics on who is using your package, how many people have done it, how recently has it been built. There's a score, and popularity is actually part of that score, but there's other parts that you can control even more. And so I think that this also helps a little bit of a positive feedback loop, so that we can keep working with, toward open source development working. And you can contribute back to the community. I think that's an important thing. So how can we do that? Well, there's opportunities for bug fixes. So if you're using a package and you find something wrong with it, which I've done, you go find out why it's not working. You can make a change. You can put a PR up there and be part of the solution. And once again, to kind of point out, I'm old enough that I grew up in a very proprietary world. So development was, we're very private with what we're doing. We're keeping it all there. I think that there's plenty of room for that still. The parts that are the proprietary knowledge, the special knowledge that we use is important. But if I'm talking to a Bluetooth device, for example, that's not proprietary to me. Flutter already knows how to do that. I can use that. And if I need to make a fix to something, I can do that. Those are things I have done. There's simple ways to give back. If you're working on a team in Spain and you're looking at a package and it's only documented in English, you can turn around and translate the documentation for the rest of your team, but you can also give it back to the community so that we can help out with that. And then another important thing is you can contribute your own solutions. For example, I just had to solve a problem where it was like a font icon, but it was multi-layered. And so like you might have 5 or 6 parts to this icon you had to put together, and there's different colors. And so I created a multi-layered icon, that contained the color information, things like that thing. And I'm probably going to package that up into a package and put it out there so that other people can use it. So that's a great way to contribute back to the community. And here I'm talking about test environments because that's an important part of, I think, any development we're doing today is being able to test it. And so testing is important. And one of the reasons is robust testing allows future changes. And what I mean by that, or I'll give you an example. I just recently refactored this widget that displayed with masking. So it put underscores where the blanks would be, and it already knew where everything was going to go and stuff. And I had written that in several parts that were, the same kind of logic, but they were different each part. And so I went and I refactored it to make it where I had something that was a little more interchangeable, and then I could just pass in the arguments I needed, and it would do what I needed it to do. If I didn't have a good test system, it'd be pretty sketchy doing something like that. I would worry about that. If I can write a good test, I probably understand how it's supposed to work. So that's another thing that really comes into play there. Testing is measurable and it's repeatable. And so this is how it applies to the professional life of doing work, but I think it also applies to our personal life. We need to test our beliefs. We need to test our thoughts on things, whether it's how we spend our money or it could be, the path I take to work, for example, or how I deal with one of my friends that's having a hard time. I want to make sure that, I don't want to mess up with that person, but if I do, I want to make sure I know why and be able to fix it. But the real lessons I take out of this are, there's times where you just have to make time. And the point is the fact that, once again, these are both almost stupid things to say, but I think they matter. Important things are important. And I don't know that we always really understand that. So the idea here is the fact that if testing is important, and nobody wants to write tests, I've never met anybody that enjoys writing tests. So what you learn from this is the fact that, well, if it's important, you need to make the time to do it. And as kind of a corollary to that is there's pretty much never enough time. Time, it's like a gas expanding. I mean, it's like, how much time do I need to accomplish everything? Well, it's probably slightly more than the time I have. It's how much time I need to accomplish whatever the tasks are. So we need to find the time to make time. But there's a little bit of a trap there. We need to make sure our work-life balance stays. So, if we're getting pushed to do too much, then we need to push back. We need to advocate for ourselves because, it is important having a good work-life balance. And that's something I think that I think women and men both have a problem with this. I think it's a little bit different sometimes how we do it, but the problems that we face, but we both have problems with it. When I was growing up, there's a song "Cats in the Cradle" about a dad that just never spent time with his kid, and then when he retired and had time to spend with his kid, the kid had no time for him. So, we need to keep learning from that. And the other thing that's kind of useful here to know is the fact that once again, maybe it's like delayed gratification, but time invested now can save time later. All right, now Flutter has a great community. It really does. And we're going to talk about that. So the first thing I would say is community is not Stack Overflow. Having one way asking questions and someone else answering it, that's not what a community is. A community inspires participation. You want to be part of it. One of the things I have learned being a part of the Flutter community that I always thought, if I just sat home all night and I never did anything with anybody and I watched TV or whatever, I'd be fine. one of the things I've learned, in large part due to the Flutter community and making these contacts, is that friends are important, you know? So we need to make sure that we like people that we deal with and find ways to do that, I think. And you get out of it what you put into it. And this is like some of the other things, but if you join the Flutter community Slack, which is very active, but all you do is lurk, you're going to get some out of it, but you're not really going to get, the rest of it. I mean, I can't tell you. I mean, I'm glad we're able to have this virtual event, but I'd much rather be there with all of you. I think that that's a vital thing to have when we're working on different communities, whether it's WTM or the broader Google community or Flutters in this case. So yeah, and it also feels really good when I go to a Flutter event and I hear people across the room going, Danielle, and come running up to me. It feels really good. And so those are things that I didn't even realize I needed, but Flutter's taught me are really good. Okay, I mentioned Flutteristas, and I'm one of the organizers of that group earlier. So let's talk a little bit about them. It was founded by Emily Fortuna, who was a Googler back in, I think, 2018. It could have been really early 2019, but I think it was 2018. Or I mean, it could have been really late 2017. I think it's 2018. It's inclusive. It supports female and non-binary people, and that's actually kind of interesting because I saw Emily come out on Twitter. I don't know, maybe a week or two ago, as non-binary, and so that was interesting. And their pronouns are they, their, them, and so I try hard to be respectful of that. And my pronouns, by the way, are she and her. But anyway, this is what the group is, and so it's a safe space. And it's interesting some of the things that Sabri said earlier, because we've got women from Arabic countries that don't want to get on camera because of the covering and afraid of how people would react. And so I've experienced that firsthand. I've seen it. I think they're more likely to do that in the Flutteristas of in our own meetings that we have. We have that once a month, and so it's a safe space for that. But I want to point out that I consider these to be important in addition to other community resources. If people just come here and hang out in female-only safe spaces, I think they lose out. I think it's to give them the tools to advocate for themselves, to give them the courage or the confidence to be able to go out and be part of the broader world. I mean, for example, we did conference speaker training, and so we had we put on a very successful conference last year, and part of what I hope comes out of that is the fact that more of us will be going and speaking at regular conferences that are not specifically for Flutteristas, or from Flutteristas, I guess more accurately. All right, let's talk a little bit real quick about social responsibility. Yeah, I think we should make a difference in the community. This is one of the beliefs I've come out of with dealing with Flutter and the Flutter community. Open software works because people contribute. I mean, that's a big deal. If people didn't contribute to the open software projects, then they would just die on the vine and they would be no good. But contributions come in many flavors. You can actually fix bugs. You can create new packages. You can translate documents. Some of them have just a buy me a coffee links, where you can contribute a little bit of cash, just a small amount for it. So, but I think that being part of the community and contributing how you are able to is important. And I think this also, though, once again, applies to like avocations as well. Whether it's joining a board of a club you're on, or whether it's just going to the different events and being part of it. I think that that's a we should strive to make a difference in the communities we're in. And I'm 55. I've been around a long time. We've come a long way. The progress of my lifetime has been amazing. When I was born, sex-based discrimination was just flat out legal. There was a movie that came out a few years back about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG, and you watch that, and it's amazing because the court case that she had to take to really start changing things was one where a man was being discriminated for being a man, because the judges would listen to that, whereas they wouldn't listen to one about a woman being discriminated. So we've come a long way, but the international community lags behind. I've definitely seen that with my work with the Flutteristas in a way that I understand a lot better now. And so once again, Sabri's talk is is great for figuring out how to try to because here in America, even women are very privileged compared to other places. So that's very good. And I want to say this matters. It's important. We need to keep working toward making the world a better place. And that's something I fully believe I get. My understanding of that has been increased by my involvement with Flutter. Okay. Now, another thing that Flutter does, because it's run by Google, is they schedule regular updates. And I think we can learn life lessons from that too. So one of the ways I look at that is I'm still learning. So the Flutteristas has taught me a lot. Watching Emily in action, they taught me a lot with how I should look at things, because I was one of maybe 6 women in my comp sci class at Oklahoma, and out of hundreds, and that's not acceptable. I've often been the only woman in the room. That's really not acceptable. So I need to learn how to not just take a look at it. I mean, because I really believe that every place I've worked, I've not been discriminated against because I was female. So I think there's other ways we need to work on this, but it's important. We need to notice it, and we need to do what we can to help it. Another way I learn is with pull requests, PRs. If anybody's not familiar with that term, it's when you're trying to contribute to a project, and someone else will come in, they review it, and then if they approve it, it might be iterate through with some changes and stuff. But if they approve it, then it gets merged into the main code. And like I said, I've been doing some work with Matt Carroll for Flutter Bounty Hunters and other things, and his PRs are brutal, but I've learned a lot from it, and it's something that's really good to keep doing. Contests and hackathons are another thing. I just did Flutter just held a puzzle, the little slider puzzles, if you remember from kids, where it's like the numbers 1 through 15 are on there, and you slide them around. I did an entry for that, and I put it out there. But doing something like that, especially with a hackathon, you can be part of a team. You can learn a lot that way. Answering questions on Stack Overflow. I did not mean to denigrate Stack Overflow earlier. I just said that was not the community. But if you're part of a Slack or part of Stack Overflow and you can answer questions, that means you're understanding things better, and it helps learning. And I think you should push your limits. Comfort zones are limiting. If you just stay in your comfort zone, you can get left behind ultimately. I think it's important. Brain stimulation. As I'm getting older, I see how important that is to keep things going. And that way it helps you be ready for the next big thing. And so anyway, all right, well, that's pretty much my talk, people. I appreciate very much everybody listening to it. I hope you found it interesting. And this is one woman's journey through life as kind of the analog with Flutter. And I've got my Twitter handle there, my LinkedIn. If you ask questions, it's great. If you want to ask them now, it's great. Otherwise, if you want to get a hold of me some other way, that works too. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Danielle, for such good insights on Flutter, and especially how you related Flutter functionalities with life values.
So thanks again, Danielle, and thanks for that great talk. I have the pleasure of talking to you all about our prizes. And let me just see. There we go. Okay. So I put a link to the survey in the chat. And so if everybody would like to fill out that survey, that is the way you will become eligible to win some prizes today. The reason we're talking about prizes now instead of at the end of the event is that not everybody is going to be staying for the workshop. So we'll just go over the prizes, but we won't give them away just now because people want to do their feedback survey after the workshop as well. So let's see. All right, so we've got a Stadia. Oh, and it's not coming. It's coming through kind of blurry. But we've got a Stadia. We've got a Chromecast, and we've got a Nest Hub. So make sure to fill out that survey. Give us your feedback. Let us know what you thought about the presentations and also the workshop. And we will give those away. We'll mail them out. I'll contact you if you are a winner, and we will mail them out. So with that, I'm going to send it to a break. And those who are staying for the workshop, come on back at 4:30 Pacific time, 7:30 Eastern. And we'll start the workshop at that point. I think there might still be a couple spots left in the workshop. Are there? Miriam?
I believe there are, Emily.
Okay, great. So there might be a couple spots left. So if you want to stay for the workshop, go ahead and fill out that registration link. Somebody wants to put that in the chat again. And then, so we'll see people back at 4:30 for the workshop. And to everyone leaving, thank you all again so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation, and be sure to fill out that survey for the chance to win these great prizes.